My favorite college course that I ever took was positive psychology. I was absolutely fascinated by the idea of studying happiness. What a fantastic subject, right? And what an interesting thing to do, to try to measure and quantify happiness. And personally, I wanted to know if there were things that I could do to create or enhance happiness in my own life. Well, prior to taking the class, I guess I had not really given it much thought, but I suppose I believed that happiness was just a reaction that we have when things go well for us. In other words, I believed that happy people are the result of happy circumstances. But in my positive psychology class, I was introduced to the possibility that we actually have a say in our happiness. And not just insofar as we have the ability to control whether good or bad things happen to us. We also have a choice in how we respond to our circumstances. And that to some degree, 40% to be precise, we can choose happiness. According to research on the heritability of happiness, when it comes to how happy we are, 50% is determined by genetics, 10% is determined by circumstances, which means that the remaining 40% of how happy we are is within our control. And this means that 40% of how happy we are is a result of our attitudes and the habits and the choices and the actions that we take on a daily basis that either cultivate happiness or diminish it. And this means that if we are intentional about practicing the things that cultivate happiness, then we can lead happier lives than leaving it to chance and hoping that good things will happen to us. All right, how many of you want to cultivate happiness in your lives? Do. Yeah. Well, part of happiness is feeling good. If I could tell you about a way to get our bodies to release a flood of positive neurotransmitters that would stimulate our brains, our immune systems, and our nervous systems, increase blood flow, burn calories, reduce stress, in a completely legal way, I might add. How many of you would at least be willing to try it? Yeah. I am so glad that you all said that, because it just so happens that we can try it right here and right now. And there's no going back. I saw all your raised hands. You said you would be willing to try, so I expect a robust level of participation. In researching this sermon, I came across something called laughter yoga, invented by Dr. Madan Kataria. Dr. Kataria knew about all of the positive effects that I just mentioned and that they could be produced by laughing. And further, he discovered that our bodies don't know the difference between real laughter and fake laughter, which means that faking laughter gives us the same exact benefits of real laughter. So this led him to create laughter yoga as a way to laugh without needing to find something funny. There were no jokes, there were no funny stories necessary. He says that you don't even need a sense of humor, which means I have absolutely no excuse not to try it, and neither do you. So, the idea behind laughter yoga is fake it till you make it. And here's the thing, you really don't have to fake it long before the laughter becomes real, especially in a group. Now, I would like to remind everyone that the holiday season is over, so please don't be the Grinch in the group. If we are all willing to be silly together, then none of us needs to be self-conscious about how silly we are being. Will you be silly with me? Yes? Wonderful. I'll invite you to keep your seats as we do this, but let's ease into it and start by sitting up nice and straight. Okay? And then let's all breathe in. And as we do so, let's raise our arms up like this. And then as we breathe out, a loud sigh. And arms come down. Great, let's try that again. Very nice. Okay, we're going to do that almost the same way again. This time we're going to breathe in when our arms go up, and when our arms go down, we're going to let out a laugh. We're going to go, ha 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 ha. Nice. Let's try it again. Excellent, excellent. Very good. Okay. So we're starting to warm up a little, but let's get our laughter engines going, okay? Our laughter engines. But it's winter, so it's a little cold. It might not start up on the first crank. So everybody, get your keys out of your pockets. Got your keys? Okay, good. Put it in the ignition. Got it? And we're going to go ahead and give it a crank, and hopefully we'll get a little laughter. Ha! Ha ha! Ha ha ha! Ha ha ha! We got our laughter engines are cranked up and going. Very good. One more version of this I want to try. Let's do some argument laughter. How do you argue and laugh at the same time? Everybody turn to somebody sitting next to you and argue laugh with them. Argue laugh. Turn and Okay, everybody on this side of the room, turn and argue laugh at that side of the room. And everybody on this side, turn and argue laugh back. All right, that was fun. Thank you for being silly, and thank you for laughing with me. And I've just lost my voice from laughing. Oh, goodness. Oh, okay. Now, laughter is unfortunately not all fun and games. Have you ever been laughed at? I have. In fact, I'll admit this, hoping that you will all be kind enough not to use it against me. The thing that bothers me more than anything else is to not be taken seriously. It stems from a fear of not mattering, of being perceived as worthless, a fear of not having value. So when this kind of laughter is directed at me, it cuts straight to the heart of these insecurities. I imagine some of you might be similar to me in this way. But even if you have thicker skin than I do, it still doesn't feel good to be laughed at. When laughter is used as a weapon, even if it doesn't hurt, it certainly doesn't feel good to know that the intent of the laughing is to harm or demean. To joke about someone or to make fun or be dismissive of something that they take seriously is to intentionally disregard their inherent worth and dignity. So what is a sensitive soul like me to do? Clam up and hide whenever someone makes a joke at my expense? Lash out and retaliate with some adult version of, I know you are, but what am I? When a joke is at my expense, I'm likely to take offense to it. But if I really stop and think about what is good for me, I can take that internal felt reaction and use what I learned in my positive psychology class. When I remember that my happiness is 40% under my control, I can choose not to let the jokes that are at my expense bother me. I can remind myself that I have inherent worth and dignity, and that this laugh attack is probably more about the insecurities of the attacker than it is about me. And if it is about me, well, then maybe I just need to remember to not take myself so seriously all the time. Is there a kernel of truth somewhere in that joke, and that's what's bothering me about it? Well, if the answer is no, then it should be no problem to just let it go. But if the answer is yes, or maybe, then I should probably thank the joker for providing me with an opportunity for self-reflection. Because the reality is, we're all human. None of us are perfect. We all have flaws and make mistakes and do things imperfectly. That is just a reality, not something that I have to get defensive about. And heck, maybe what the joker is pointing out about me actually is funny. So for the longest time, I would pronounce the word theater. I'm not sure how that extra R snuck in there, but for as long as I can remember, I've been saying it that way, and I'm still actually working on it. Oftentimes, I'll have to catch myself. But when one of my friends called me out on it, it was an uncomfortable moment of realization. And I'm sure that my reaction initially was to either deny or defend my pronunciation, but the truth is, I was just wrong. I double-checked, and there is no second R in the word theater. It's become something of an inside joke with my friend. He'll say, "Let's see a movie. What theater do you want to go to?" And I've learned to laugh along. It's good-natured. And after all, it's pretty hard to laugh at someone who is already laughing. So how's that for a resilience strategy? We don't need to be perfect. We just need to not take ourselves too seriously. Now, communities can adopt this mentality too. I was introduced to this idea by Nadia Boltz-Weber, a Lutheran pastor in Denver. In her church, she promotes what she refers to as an emphasis on participation, not perfection. As an example of this, she says it's more important to her that many lay folks be involved in leading the liturgy and having active roles in the services than to ensure that everything is done exactly the right way by just doing it all herself. And this idea extends beyond just worship services. It really means in communities allowing people to take the reins, to allow them to learn as they go, and to support them as they do the messy work of being in beloved community. Because it's more important that we do the work of beloved community than to try to do the right thing the right way. Now, this is not to say that we should be unnecessarily sloppy or careless in our work, or that we shouldn't try to avoid pitfalls when we see them coming. It doesn't excuse us from listening to the experiences of others and allowing ourselves to be mentored by those who have done before what we are trying to do now. In fact, this is why we do our growing and our transforming better in community rather than as isolated individuals. We can learn from the experiences and the perspectives of others and maybe see the world through a lens that isn't our own. And this is only possible in a community that doesn't take itself too seriously, a community that can joke about itself. And even with self-deprecating humor, we have to be careful not to use it so much that we internalize a diminished sense of ourselves. We have to be sure that the jokes we make at our own expense are purely to create a moment of fun and levity. Ooh, this humor with accountability thing is harder than it looks. But it seems to me that it's worth the effort to become more resilient people who can let laughter flow freely when it's well-intentioned, and who can let it roll off their backs when it's not. In today's reading, which is actually part of a song by Regina Spektor, she says, "No one's laughing at God. We're all laughing with God." The God of Regina Spektor's song seems to be a pretty good role model in the humor department. This God is pretty resilient and able to laugh at God's self. God can be funny, she says, at a cocktail party when listening to a good God-themed joke. Well, there's God setting a good example at letting it roll right off God's back. And she continues, God can be funny when told to give you money if you just pray the right way, or grants wishes like Jiminy Cricket and Santa Claus. God can be so hilarious. Well, it sounds to me like the God of her song is a trickster. Imagine being an all-powerful God, but allowing people to create these incredibly narrow and self-serving ideas of God. Hilarious. The real joke here is that anyone who would conceive of a God so small and petty. And yet, for those who have stopped doing the theological work that we are all called to do, this is the God belief that some people have landed on and no longer question the relevance of. So this is why it's important that we reflect on our beliefs, theological or otherwise. If you believe in God, you should know why. If you don't believe in God, you should know why. And most importantly, whatever you believe and why ever you believe it, most importantly, you must ask, how does this belief affect my actions? And how do these actions affect the lives of myself and the lives of others? Are they life-affirming? or are they life-limiting? Am I laughing at, or am I laughing with? If God exists, then I'd like to believe that God has a pretty good sense of humor. After all, and this is a big if, I'm not actually making this as a truth claim, but if God exists, and if God is responsible for the creation of the whole universe, then that means that God created absolutely everything that is funny. Everything that is funny. Let that sink in for a moment. It seems to me that it would be hard to offend this kind of God. And it seems to me that maybe we should be more concerned with not offending each other. Now, not specifically with regard to humor, but this was the thinking of some early 20th century Unitarian theologians who developed a theology of humanism. The type of humanism they advocated for didn't deny the existence of God, but thought that most forms of theistic belief were focusing on the wrong things by trying to define the nature and the will of God. Instead, these humanists believed that regardless of God's existence or nature or abilities, that we should be more concerned with humanity. Reverend Curtis Reese, a leading Unitarian humanist thinker of the time, wrote, "The humanist regards the universe as the given and is not likely to speculate unduly on either the beginning or the end of things cosmic. The primary concern of humanism is human development." And so, in that human development, let us not forget to develop our human tendency toward humor and to use our laughter in the spirit of the humanists towards the progress of humanity and not as a weapon. Sometimes it's not laughter that we are having to be resilient against. Sometimes laughter can actually be the tool of our resilience. Have you ever faced a situation where it seems like your only choice is to laugh or to cry? Let me say that often in these situations, either response is totally and completely acceptable. It's okay to cry. And sometimes in these situations, we actually do both. We laugh and we cry. I've done it. I remember once being so frustrated. And it's funny because now I don't even remember why. I don't remember what it was about. And that's the power that emotion has over our memories, isn't it? We often can't remember, or we can often remember how we felt long after the who, what, the where, the when, and the why have faded from our memories. Anyway, I remember being more frustrated than I have ever been before or since. And I went for a drive to cool my head. And just a few blocks down the road, away from eyes that might see and ears that might hear, I pulled over. My frustration had reached its boiling point, and I just yelled right there in the car, as long and as loud as I could. And then the tears came. And the yell gave way to crying. And then I pictured myself, right? I pictured myself watching myself essentially throwing a tantrum in my car. I pictured what I must look like. And that image, it just made me start to laugh. I was laughing at myself crying. And I kept just slipping back and forth between crying and laughing. I was so confused. Now again, I don't remember the source of the frustration. I don't remember what caused it. But I will never forget being in the car and yelling and crying and laughing. And when it was done, I felt like a pressure valve had been opened and all of my frustration had just been released. Sometimes we need to cry, and sometimes we need to laugh. Because as painful and as frustrating as life can be, we still have that 40% of our happiness that is within our control. We have that 40% that we can intentionally cultivate happiness by training ourselves to see the blessings in our lives. And this is why gratitude is so important. We can cultivate happiness by being willing to laugh, like you all were when you joined me in laughter yoga. And we can cultivate happiness by building strong bonds in a beloved community, just like this one. And like the Unitarian humanists from a century ago, may we commit ourselves to human development, both personally and socially. May we cultivate happiness in ourselves, and may we cultivate happiness in others. And if such a thing as God there be, may we laugh with God. May it be so.